At 9:14 on the worst storm of the year, my neighbor knocked on my door and asked me to drive her across town. By 10:02, we were standing inside her photography studio on Burnside, and I was realizing that her files had never been in danger. The candles burning on every flat surface made that impossible to misread. My name is Tucker Harmon. I was 29 that October, working as a licensed electrician for a commercial contractor in Portland, where fall storms arrive early and take things personally. For 3 straight days, the wind off the Cascades had been tearing shingles off rooftops and folding umbrellas inside out. I'd spent most of that Thursday rewiring a restaurant kitchen that had shorted out when a tree branch found its way into the utility box. By the time I got home around 8, the city was losing power in patches, and my building sat 1 block from the edge of the outage zone. The apartment complex I rented was a converted Victorian on Southeast Hawthorne. 3 units, 1 per floor, with original hardwood that announced every footstep to the person below. I was on the 2nd floor. My neighbor above me was a woman named Gemma Aldrich. She was 27, ran a portrait photography business out of a studio on Burnside, and had a way of making people look like the best version of themselves in front of a camera. I knew this because she'd shown me her portfolio once on a rainy Sunday when we'd both run out of things to pretend we were doing. The photos were extraordinary. The people in them looked genuinely seen. Gemma had moved into the top unit 8 months before that storm. She'd come from Seattle after a long relationship ended around the same time a lease expired. She didn't say much about the relationship, only that it had lasted 4 years and concluded with the mutual realization that they'd both been performing versions of themselves neither of them actually was. I understood that more than I said. We'd fallen into the rhythm that neighboring strangers fall into, borrowing extension cords, rotating the good parking spot, texting when a package arrived. Somewhere around month 3, the rhythm changed without either of us naming it. She started leaving the stairwell light on when she heard me coming in, late. I started keeping her coffee order in my phone in case I was passing the place on Belmont she preferred. Nothing you could point to directly. Everything you could feel clearly. I had reasons not to push it further. 2 years earlier, I'd gotten out of a 3-year relationship that had slowly become 2 people sharing space without sharing anything real. We'd broken up in the driveway on a Tuesday, and I'd had to call my own landlord because I'd been sleeping at her place for so long I had nothing in writing. Since then, I'd been careful. Careful had started to feel indistinguishable from afraid, but I was still calling it careful. So when Gemma knocked at 9:14, holding her phone with the flashlight on and wearing a gray canvas jacket over whatever she'd had on when the lights went out, I asked if something was wrong. "The power's out on Burnside," she said. "My studio. You have a generator. The generator runs the lights and the HVAC, not the server." "What's on the server?" "A family portrait session from Tuesday. I haven't backed it up yet." She looked at me over the glow of her phone. "I know it's a bad night to ask." I looked past her at the window. Rain was coming sideways across the streetlights. "How many kids?" 4, under 8. They drove up from Eugene. "Let me get my jacket." Gemma's car was a 10-year-old Subaru that smelled like lens cleaner, and the lavender air freshener clipped to the vent. She navigated the dark streets with the calm competence of someone who had driven in worse. Tree branches lay across 2 of the side roads. We rerouted without discussing it. "You didn't have to come," she said after a few minutes. "You asked." "I know, but you'd been at a job since early." 7, I said, "but who's counting?" She glanced at me. "You are, clearly." "I'm saying it wasn't a big deal." "Okay." She didn't look convinced, but she was smiling toward the windshield. She had a playlist running low. Old folk music, finger-picked guitar, and voices that knew what they were talking about. I'd heard her play it through the ceiling on weekend mornings and had come to associate it with the smell of her coffee. I didn't mention that. Around the Morrison Bridge, she reached to adjust the volume, and her hand passed close enough to my knee that I registered the warmth before she pulled back. Neither of us said anything. The distance between her hand and my leg became the loudest thing in the car. "You do this a lot?" she asked. "Drive across town in floods?" "Help people. I'm an electrician. It's structurally built in. You know what I mean. A pause. You fixed Mrs. Okafor's outlet on the third floor last month and wouldn't let her pay you. She's 74 and it was one outlet. She told me you stayed 2 hours. She made coffee. It would have been rude to leave. Gemma looked at me a beat too long for safety. I watched the road instead. We crossed the bridge and turned east. The studio was in a renovated brick building between a print shop and a Vietnamese restaurant, doing good business despite the storm. I helped Gemma navigate around a downed branch in the parking lot. She unlocked the front door, and I followed her in. The backup power had kept the heat on. The studio was warm and smelled like the cedar oil she used on the wood floors. She went straight to the back where the server rack sat, clicked on a flashlight, and checked the indicator lights. They were all green. She stood there for a second looking at them. Then she turned around. "They're fine," I said. "Yeah. You knew they'd be fine." She set the flashlight on the editing desk so the beam pointed at the ceiling, filling the room with diffused white light. "The generator kicks on automatically. I set it up last spring." She paused. "I knew it would have kicked on." I looked around the room. On the low shelf along the east wall, 4 candles were burning in glass holders. I hadn't noticed them when we walked in. They'd been lit before we arrived. There was a bottle of wine on the corner of the desk and 2 glasses beside it, and a small Bluetooth speaker on top of the filing cabinet. I looked at her. "I've been trying to find a reason to ask you out for 2 months," she said. "I kept coming up with nothing. So you invented a storm emergency." "The storm was real." She crossed her arms. "I just already knew the files were fine." "Gemma." "I know." She held my gaze. "But you always have a reason not to cross the hallway. And I got tired of watching you stand on the other side of it." I had spent 2 years congratulating myself on being disciplined, on not repeating patterns, on not mistaking chemistry for something more than proximity and shared loneliness. Standing in her studio with rain hitting the windows and candlelight moving across her face, all of that reasoning sounded like something I had told myself, instead of something braver. "One question," I said. She raised her eyebrows. "The family from Eugene. Real. But their photos are fine. Perfectly safe and beautifully exposed." I laughed before I could stop it. "You planned the whole thing." "I brought the candles in this morning." She gestured at the wine. "Glasses are mine from upstairs. Playlist was ready." A pause. "I was going to tell you the drive wasn't necessary the minute we walked in. But you waited. I needed to see if you'd come." That was the thing about Gemma. She paid attention to the right questions. She hadn't needed me to say something romantic in the car or reach for her hand at the bridge. She needed to see whether I'd get off the couch in a rainstorm for her, even dressed up as something practical. I walked to the desk and poured wine into both glasses. I handed her one. She took it without breaking eye contact. "For the record," I said, "I knew something was off when you mentioned the server." "No, you didn't." "I suspected." "You're retroactively suspecting." "I thought it was unlikely a photographer with your setup would have 4-day-old raw files unsynced to the cloud." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Okay, maybe you suspected." "I came anyway." Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, relief, like a breath she'd been holding since the knock on my door. We stood there with our wine, while a November storm tried its best to get through the brick walls. She had built the whole thing. The excuse, the drive, the candles, because she understood something I hadn't said out loud. I needed a reason before I could stop manufacturing reasons not to. "Gemma," I said. "Yeah. I've been leaving the stairwell light on for you for 6 months." She looked at me. "I know. I thought you knew." "I did." Her voice dropped. "I was waiting for you to say it." I set my glass down and stepped closer. She didn't move back. The rain hit the window in a long gust and the candles flickered without going out. "Can I tell you something I should have said in September?" I asked. "Yes. I think about talking to you more than I think about any other part of my day." She set her glass next to mine. Her hand came up and rested against my chest, and I felt my entire rib cage go still beneath it. Then I kissed her. It was nothing like a decision. It felt more like a door that had been sitting unlocked for months and only now swung open. She kissed me back with the specific warmth of someone who has been patient for a long time and is no longer pretending to be. I rested my hands on her waist, and she held the front of my jacket, and somewhere in the city the storm kept going without us. When we finally stepped back, she was still holding my jacket. "Hi," she said. "Hi." That took a while. I was being careful. You were being terrified. I didn't argue. Both things, I said yes. She smiled the way she had in the car, the kind that pulled at something behind my sternum. We sat on the small couch she kept for client consultations, close enough that her shoulder pressed against mine. She poured more wine. Outside, the wind finally started to ease. She asked about the restaurant kitchen I'd been rewiring. I told her about the owner, a woman named Barbara, who'd been running the place for 30 years and knew every regular by name. Gemma told me about a portrait session she'd done the previous week, a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary. The husband had Parkinson's, and his hands shook. She'd talked with them for an hour before touching the camera, and by the time she picked it up, they'd both forgotten she was there. The photo she ended up with was one of the best she'd ever taken. "Do you get to keep a copy?" I asked. "I always ask. Most people say yes." She was quiet a moment. "That's the part nobody tells you about this job. You end up holding pieces of people's lives." "Is that heavy?" She considered it. "Sometimes. Mostly it feels like a privilege." I looked at her in the candlelight and understood something I hadn't known how to articulate before. She wasn't only talented. She was the kind of person who took their talent seriously to deserve it. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Her voice had changed, not dramatically, but enough. "I applied for a residency program last spring. Documentary photography. It's through a foundation in Edinburgh." She kept her eyes on her wineglass. "I found out Monday that I got in. Edinburgh, Scotland. I did the math automatically. Approximately 5,100 miles. Gemma, that's significant. 3 months, January through March." She finally looked at me. "I've wanted it for 2 years. I applied twice before and didn't make the shortlist." 3 months. January was 8 weeks away. We had kissed for the first time 40 minutes ago. "Why didn't you tell me when you found out?" I asked. "Because I was still deciding whether to go." "It sounds like a thing you go to." "It is." She set her glass down. "But I wanted to know if there was a reason to think twice, and I wasn't brave enough to just ask you." So she had built the storm emergency, the candles, the drive across a flooding city. All of it because she needed to know whether I was standing on the other side of the hallway for a reason or just out of habit. "This changes things," I said. "I know. But it doesn't change what I told you earlier." Her eyes searched mine. "Tucker, you should go to Edinburgh." She let out a slow breath. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be generous. I'm saying it because you lit up the second you mentioned it and you didn't even realize you did." She was quiet. "I've also spent 2 years making the careful choice," I continued. "And I'm tired of what that gets me." "Which is what?" "A very tidy life with nothing in it." She reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were cold from the wine glass. 3 months is a long time. It's also not forever. Long distance is hard. So is spending the next 3 months pretending I didn't figure out that I'm in love with you. She went still, not frightened still, the kind of still that happens when you hear something you've been wanting to hear and aren't prepared for how much you wanted it. "You can't know that," she said quietly. I've been watching you live your life through a ceiling for 8 months. I know you stay up past midnight when a shoot isn't going well. I know you reorganize your kitchen when you're anxious. I know you play that folk playlist when you're happy." I held her gaze. "I know enough." She squeezed my hand. Her eyes were bright in the candlelight. "I'm scared," she said. "I know, me too. What if it's harder than you're expecting? Then we figure out something harder than we've figured out before." She stood and faced me, still holding my hand. She was looking at me in a way she had never looked at me across the hallway. "Come back to the apartment with me," she said. I stood up. She didn't let go. We drove home with the windows fogging and the storm finally tapering to something polite. She parked and we walked up the front steps together, closer than neighbors usually stood. On the second floor landing, I would have said good night. She turned at the stairs to the third floor and looked down at me. "Come up." "Gemma, just to talk." Completely calm, completely serious. "I don't want this night to end with you going to a different floor." I followed her up. We sat on her couch until 2 in the morning. She made tea because the wine was gone. I fixed the cabinet hinge that had been loose since she moved in. She showed me the Edinburgh program brief on her laptop. The assignments, the cohort of 8 photographers, the gallery showing at the end. Watching her flip through it, I saw the same thing I'd seen when she talked about the anniversary couple. She needed to go. That was just the truth of it. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. "January 6th, she said. "I'll be at the airport." She looked at me. "You don't have to." "Gemma." She stopped. "I'll be at the airport," I said again, "and I'll be there in March." She kissed me once more before I went down the stairs, softer than the first time and somehow more serious. January came faster than 8 weeks should allow. We spent December finding out what we were made of. It turned out we were made of breakfast tacos from the cart on Division Street and long walks around Ladd's Addition when the winter sun showed up for an hour. It turned out she reorganized her kitchen twice before the residency, and I pretended not to notice. It turned out I was better at this than I'd been telling myself for 2 years. The morning of January 6th, I carried one of her bags to the curb. We stood in the cold while her rideshare approached. "Call me when you land," I said. "It's a 10-hour flight." "Call me anyway." She zipped my jacket collar up an inch where it had folded down. "You'll be asleep. Wake me up." She held onto my lapel for a moment. "Tucker." "Yeah. Thank you for coming in the storm. Thank your generator." She laughed into my shoulder. The rideshare pulled up. I held the door and she got in, and she kept her hand in mine until the door had to close. Long distance is not a romantic concept, and I want to be honest about that. It is scheduling calls across a 6-hour time difference and watching her eat breakfast on a laptop screen while I'm eating dinner. It is her crying after a critique session went sideways and me being unable to do anything except stay on the line. It is her falling asleep mid-call at 11 p.m., her time with her phone propped on the pillow, and me watching the ceiling of her Edinburgh bedroom for 10 minutes before hanging up. Not because I had to, but because I didn't want to. But there were the other parts. The photo she sent at 6 a.m., her time of a fish market, coming to life in the dark. The voice memo she left when she found a cafe that stocked the same tea I drank at home. The Saturday she called from a hill above the city in the wind and held the phone up so I could hear it. At week 6, I booked a flight for week 11. I didn't tell her until I had the confirmation email. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, I have a question." "Okay. Do you have a couch I can sleep on?" Silence. Then Tucker. "You said to come. I'm coming." "You said March." It's close enough to March that the semantic difference is negligible. That is the nerdiest sentence you have ever said to me. I have a non-stop into Edinburgh on February 17th. She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her exhale. "Bring your good jacket," she said. "It's cold." Is that a yes? That's a yes. I landed on a Tuesday in weak winter sunlight. She was standing outside the arrival's gate, in a coat I hadn't seen before, her hair longer than January. She was holding a coffee cup from a cafe I didn't recognize, but it was the right tea, which meant she'd gone there before coming to the airport, specifically for that reason. She handed it to me without a word. I took a sip. It was right. "You found it," I said. I told them it was for the guy who was coming to see me. "What did they say?" "They said to bring you in person next time." I kissed her right there in the arrivals hall, with my carry-on still on my shoulder, and travelers streaming around us. She grabbed the back of my jacket and held on, and I thought about the storm and the candles in the studio, all the months of standing on the wrong side of a hallway. She showed me the city over 4 days. She took me to the fish market at dawn because she wanted me to see it in person. She introduced me to the program director as the electrician who doesn't know when to stop fixing things. He said that sounded like a good quality in a person. On my last evening, we walked up to Calton Hill in the dark. The city spread below in amber and white, the water glittering in the distance. She stood in front of me, and I put my arms around her against the wind. "Well?" she said. "Well, what?" She tilted her head up. "You've seen my life here. What do you think?" I thought about the fish market and the cafe and the way she spoke to the other photographers in her cohort, like someone who had finally found the right room. I thought about the photo I'd seen on her laptop that morning, a man in his 80s reading a newspaper in a shaft of light somewhere in the old town. It was the kind of photo you looked at and immediately understood what she meant when she said she was holding pieces of people's lives. "I think you needed to come here," I said. She turned in my arms. "I needed you to see that." "I know. I'm not asking you to move to Edinburgh." "Good, because my license doesn't transfer." She smiled. "But when I come home in March, I'll be there." "And after that?" Portland was 8 time zones west and held my certification, my tools, my lease, my coffee cart on Division Street. It also held a third-floor apartment above mine and a woman who had lit candles in a studio before I arrived. "After that," I said, "we figure out what next looks like." "That's not very specific." "I'm good with my hands. Long-term planning is your department." "My department." "You orchestrated a storm emergency with candles and a wine glass. You're clearly the strategist." "That was a one-time operation." "It worked, though." She leaned her forehead against my chest. "I really didn't know if you'd come that night." "I came. You drove across a flooding city for files that weren't in danger." "To be clear," I said, "I was coming for you." Her arms tightened around my waist. She came home on a Tuesday in late March. I was at the airport because I said I would be. She walked out of arrivals, looking tired and windburned, and like the best thing I'd seen in 2 months. She had an extra bag she hadn't left with, full of prints for her portfolio show. I carried it without asking. We drove home on the 205. She fell asleep against the window before the Marquam Bridge. I carried her bags upstairs. She made it to the 3rd floor under her own power, unlocked her door, and stood in the entryway looking at the prints she'd shipped home from Edinburgh. They'd arrived while she was in transit and leaned in a row against the kitchen wall, just as she'd planned. "They look right here," she said. "They do." She turned and leaned in the doorframe. "Come in." "It's late." "Tucker." I looked at her. She was still in her travel clothes, her hair flat from the flight, and she was smiling at me the same way she had across the parking lot in the storm. "I'm not ready for you to go to a different floor," she said. I stepped inside. A year after that storm, we found a craftsman to rent together on Woodstock, with a back porch looking out at the neighbor's old oak tree. It needed rewiring in the kitchen and a new breaker panel, which I handled over 2 weekends. Gemma documented the whole process and hung one print in the hallway, the one where I'm up on a ladder, doing something technical and completely failing to notice her. She said it was her favorite photo she'd ever taken of a person who wasn't her subject. I told her that made 2 of us. Sometimes in the evenings we sit on that back porch, and I think about the knock on the door in the storm, about the candles already burning when we walked in, about a woman who understood that I needed a reason, even a manufactured one, because I had been telling myself for too long that caution and courage were the same thing. They aren't. I know that now. What would you have done if your neighbor drove you across town in a storm for files that didn't need saving? Have you ever had someone create a reason to be alone with you because you were too careful to make one yourself? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to be a little closer to us here, we've opened a membership where we share shorter stories every week with no ads. If this one meant something, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.